Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. I just need to let everybody know that the stream is on social media and that they can participate in the stream. What's going on, Ballin the Hobbit? Glad to see you here. Happy holidays to you and your family as well. What's going on, Steve? All Hollow Mac. Glad to see you here. Glad to see you here. Entrepreneur King. And tonight's live stream, I'm going to ask a critical question. Do Americans feel like they have nothing to lose? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because when I look at how so many Americans out here are struggling in this country in the aftermath of the pandemic, it's looking very desperate all around the country for everybody who is then laid off, and even for some of the people who are essential workers out here. And I believe that the country right now is really at a very, very tense and dire position. But when I look at the way our politicians are handling things, it's like they're really, as I see it, having some disconnect as related to the reality of we the people on the ground. So when I look at the way these politicians are just handling things, they really do not understand the suffering that people are going through here in most of these cities and most of these states out here. And they really, especially in Washington, really don't understand how tense things are for the average American out here. So when I look at the whole situation of America right now, it really takes me back to one of the darkest periods of my life from 2002 all the way to about 2008 after I left AmeriCorps Vista at Strive. Now, back then, I thought that I was sure to get this job working with the Strive after AmeriCorps. Unfortunately, I was told they had no place for me in the organization. And then after that, my life just after 9/11, I managed to get another job as a receptionist, but that fell through. And then everything just practically fell apart in my life. And I remember that really dark period of my life. And I had a really bad period of depression, and my anxiety got really bad. And I remember being in this dark place where I was practically feeling completely powerless in my life. And I felt like nothing was going right in my life. And I felt like I had lost everything. And, I was living on a family member giving me $60 a month. And it was just one of the worst times in my life. And I remember, just feeling completely hopeless, completely down, and it was a really dark period. And when I look at the state of America right now, and I think about all of the American people out here who are out of work, I think about all of the small business owners who are just practically losing everything that they work for due to these COVID-19 restrictions. It reminds me a lot of that dark period in my life. And I remember being in that dark period, just feeling again powerless, very frustrated, very angry, and being on the brink. Because whenever you don't have money to go out here and be able to take care of your bills, you have a lot of pressure on you. And whenever you have your home situation being put at risk where you can't pay those bills, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your electricity, you feel like your life is in a vice, and you feel so anxious that it's like you're on edge all the time, because you feel like you're really on the edge because everything you work for, you're about to lose. And this is where a person reaches a very, very dark place, which I call the nothing to lose place. Because once you take everything from a human being, what happens to that human being is that person starts to fall into a serious mental decline. And when they fall into that mental decline, they fall into a place, again, I call the place of nothing to lose. Because when a person gets to the point of the nothing to lose space, they just don't really care about anything or anyone. And when a person reaches the nothing to lose space, that is a place you don't really want to be with that person. Because when a person is in the nothing to lose place, they can practically, you don't know what they're capable of. And if they go out here, they're capable of practically doing anything. So a lot of these politicians really do not understand the powder keg they have created, or ever since March, when they follow this so-called lockdown theory, where they said they were trying to flatten the curve by closing so-called non-essential businesses and laying off workers all across the country and putting half the country out of work. A lot of these politicians really don't understand the powder keg that they are tamping down, and they don't understand that all it takes is one light spark to set that whole powder keg off and practically have this country exploding in a rage, where you are going to see people doing things you would never think they were capable of doing. Because when you put a person in an extremely desperate place, they just can go off, and you'll find them doing things that you never thought they'd be capable of doing. And I think that America right now is really, as I said in a previous video, on the brink. And a lot of these politicians, they really have no real understanding of what the brink is. And they really don't understand the whole situation most Americans are living on right now. Because a lot of these politicians, some of them, like your Andrew Cuomo's and your Garcettis and your Gavin Newsoms, they're legacy politicians. And because they're legacy politicians who inherited their jobs from their fathers and their grandfathers, they really don't have a clue to what's going on with the man on the street. And they really have not connected with the man on the street to know the man on the street's struggles. And if you don't understand the man on the street struggles, then what's going to happen is, when you create these powder kegs, things are going to really go out here and explode. And it's not going to be something very pretty. Because as a guy who has been, on the dark side of life and seen, people on the street and people working these days, I know how bad it is out there. And it's been really bad in this country, I say, ever since the 9/11 recession. A lot of people out there never really recovered from the 9/11 recession. And a lot of these American people, they were living in this country for, I say, the last 18 years, um, really from paycheck to paycheck, because most of the jobs that used to pay good money are no longer here in the United States anymore. And ever since your Bill Clinton changed the US economy from a manufacturing economy to a service economy, we have seen a lot of the good jobs leave the United States and go overseas. And what has happened is a lot of Americans, when they were working these retail jobs, they were living day to day and living paycheck to paycheck, just getting by on these jobs. And a lot of American businesses, they were, a lot of the small businesses, not the big ones, the small ones, they were also living day to day. And a lot of American people, they were out here in these small businesses. They were just being barely able to make their ends meet, because when you have people working in service businesses like restaurants and retail, there's a razor thin profit margin because your overhead takes up so many costs. And many of those people, once this pandemic started, they were living day to day. And what happens is that if they wind up closing their business for a extended period of time, there's no way for them to get started once again. And this is something many of the scientists who were talking about flattening the curve really didn't understand, because a lot of these guys, they know science, like Dr. Fauci knows science, but he does not understand economics, and he doesn't understand mental health. And these guys, they sat there and they talked about, oh, we want to flatten the curve as related to these statistics. But what they did not understand is that in the American economic system is a capitalist economic system. And in a capitalist free market economic system, when you have a service-based economy that is running on a razor-thin profit margin, an extended period of closing of small businesses can practically collapse that entire economic system, because these scientists really did not understand how everything is connected economically in this country. And because they did not understand how things were connected, they didn't understand that when you have 60% of the country running through small businesses, that's how the country operates. I mean, most of America's businesses are small businesses, like my SJS Direct Imprint. They are small, sole proprietorships or LLCs, and most of them operate day to day on whatever revenue they receive. And many people don't really, again, in Washington and even in these state houses, don't understand how their economies are interconnected inside of this country. Now, many of them are looking to try to be the big hero who defeated the virus, but they're not understanding that the approach that they're using is one that is destined to fail. And the reason why it's destined to fail is because it runs counter to the economic system of capitalism. Because if you don't have small businesses running, then you don't have people working at jobs, one, and two, you don't have small businesses making money that can become taxable revenue. So many of these politicians, with their lockdown theory, what they've done is practically put the United States on a collision course to hitting a wall, because what they're thinking is, oh, if we go out here and shut down these so-called non-essential businesses, we'll be able to come back. But unfortunately, the United States economy is not designed to work that way, because you have to continuously have revenue coming in to the country in order to pay taxes that pay for things like municipal services, such as your roads, such as your mail, such as your highways, such as your police. And you also need money from tax revenue to pay for things like hospitals. And this is the point that many of your politicians really don't understand in the big picture. They really don't understand that if you keep the US economy, small businesses closed for too long, you're going to run out of money to pay for general operating costs for municipal services. And many states right now, they're having a problem with their budgets, and they're talking about laying off city workers, like here in New York, talking about laying off transit workers and other essential workers like teachers. And when you do that, you're headed down a really bad road, because as your tax revenue continues to decline, eventually you're going to reach a point where you're not going to be able to pay for hospitals. So what's going to happen is the whole COVID-19 pandemic we're trying to contain with this flatten the curve approach is going to completely fall apart. And it's going to fall apart because you're going to completely run out of money. Because if you don't have money coming in from small businesses to pay tax revenue, then you're not going to have any money to pay for hospitals. Unfortunately, many of your politicians have not really connected the dots as related to the American economy and how it works. And because they're so caught up, as I see it, in their ego about trying to, as I see it in some cases, beat the evil orange man and try to appear to have their approach be the better approach, what has happened is the American people have become completely lost in the shuffle, and the suffering of the American people has become completely lost because many of these politicians are so caught up in their ideals that they have forgotten the real people on the ground and the real people on the street. And we saw a microcosm of that this spring when your Gretchen Whitmer went out here and just continued to pile on restrictions. And when she continued to pile on restrictions and went to the point where she was practically telling people they couldn't even buy Easter candy at a Target or go out here and buy seeds at a grocery store, that was the first start of the boiling point starting to rise in this country. And that's when we saw all of those militiamen looking to storm the State House, because those people had practically had enough of what they thought was a tyrant looking to go out here and continue to impose restrictions on them. Now, this person is trying to say that they're doing this in the name of safety, but most of the American people felt like they were having their rights infringed upon because you were already told you could not have your job. You were told you could not have your business. And now this person is trying to tell you you can't even buy things in a store or even visit your relatives. So people were already tense and they were already heated. And this Gretchen Whitmer really did not understand where she was standing. And one of the things that I know from being on that edge is you have to know where you're standing, because when you know where you're standing, you know where the line is. And many of these politicians, as I see it, really don't understand where the line is. And because they don't understand where the line is, they just keep pushing with these restrictions, thinking they're doing something good, not understanding you're further alienating all of your constituents and you're alienating all of your citizens to the point where their anger and frustration is starting to simmer and boil. And it's really getting more and more closer to the boiling point. Thank you, Steve, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. If you want to donate to the super chat, you can do so as well. And if you want to donate to the Cash App, that really helps me a lot in staying on the air and being able to make more videos and do more live streams. So you can donate to the Cash App as well. But when I saw that whole situation with Gretchen Whitmer, she didn't understand where the line was, and she just kept pushing. And eventually she got pushback with these militiamen, and they tried to demonize them in the media. But I understand what was going on because I was at that point in my life at one time where I had family members who were trying to tell me how to spend my money, telling me what I could spend my money on. And because I didn't have my own stuff, I was really out here frustrated and really angry. And I had to bite my tongue in that situation. So I understand what it is to be on edge like that. And what I'm seeing right now is with these politicians, they don't understand how on edge people are, and they really don't understand how this situation is becoming more tense and how they're actually escalating things and actually creating an even worse situation. Because while they're trying to say, oh, we're trying to stop COVID, what they don't understand is they're pushing people on over closer to the edge. And when you have over 200 million people who don't know where their next dollar is, 200 million people or 300 million people who don't know where their next meal is, or even if they're going to have a home, you have I'd say, not even a powder keg of dynamite, you have a thermonuclear explosion getting ready to happen. And that nobody in Washington or the state houses really understands the gravity of this situation. They really don't understand how things really are. They don't understand how tense things are. And they really don't understand when you have a person who doesn't know where they're going to get their next meal, doesn't know where they're going to get their next dollar, or doesn't even know if they're going to have a place to stay. That person is basically, their anxiety level is at an all-time high. They are extremely tense. And when you go out here and you just keep pounding the restrictions and keep pushing and pushing and pushing, eventually you're going to reach a point where you're going to push that person too far. And eventually that person is going to explode. And when you have over 200 million people in a country like this, that's not a good thing you want to go out here and stir up, because when you do that, you're literally going to have something worse than what we had in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. Because when we started to see, again, with Gretchen Whitmer, we started to see that tension start to rise. And then we saw it again explode with the murder of George Floyd, because people started to fear that in the wake of these restrictions, that their rights were not only being taken away from them, but they were also looking to go out here and start hurting people in the streets. And this is why we saw the entire country practically explode and the world explode with George Floyd. And many of these politicians really did not understand why all of those people started rioting in the cities, rioting all across the country, and rioting all across the world, because they felt like their governments were not serving them. They felt like their governments were not supporting them. And they felt like their government was completely detached from them. And that's what I saw on the ground here all across the United States. Many of these politicians, they were good at making speeches, but they really did not have a gravity of understanding what was going on the streets for most people, because that murder of George Floyd practically, again, set the entire country off. And instead of these politicians, pulling back, what they did was then try to just keep things on. And especially in many of the left states like California and New York, they just kept things going instead of understanding you really need to pull back, because you don't understand, again, how tense things are, and how you have a lot of people who, again, are on the brink, and when they're on the brink, this is not a person you want to mess with, because you don't know what this person is capable of doing. And what many of these politicians really don't understand is also, as they were after the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, a lot of these politicians do not have the support of law enforcement like they used to. So back in the early days of the pandemic, the politicians had the support of the police, but with the murder of George Floyd, a lot of those police officers became demoralized. And in cities like here in New York, we had a lot of the older cops going out here, and they were putting in their retirement papers because they just couldn't deal with the stress of the job anymore, because because the whole thing is many of these cities fell apart because many of these politicians, again, released a lot of prisoners out of the jails and made the crime go through the roof. So a lot of officers are demoralized, and you don't have that support like you used to back before George Floyd was murdered. So when I look at the overall panoramic picture, I see politicians, keep pushing and pushing, not understanding that you have police officers pulling away. And that's been shown to us with a lot of the sheriffs saying, I'm not enforcing this order, I'm not supporting this order. And you even have judges saying, I'm not supporting these restrictions. So a lot of these politicians really do not understand that if they keep pushing, they're losing support. But a lot of them want to keep doing this because they want to look and appear to be important. But what they don't understand is they're not looking important. What they're doing is alienating a lot of people. And a lot of those people, they have practically lost everything. And because they have lost everything, or feel like they're just about to lose everything, they are feeling like they are in that point of nothing to lose. And when you have, again, a person who is heading closer and closer to the position of nothing to lose, that, again, is not a person you want to mess with. And when you have a whole nation of people who are in that nothing to lose position, then you are in a very, very, very dangerous place. And a lot of these, again, politicians, they really don't understand how it is on the street for the average everyday brother out here, or the average everyday man or woman out here. They don't understand things because they're detached from the world, and because they're so detached from the world, they're thinking, oh, I can just keep going on, not understanding that their approach, again, it was proven not to work. And the World Health Organization itself said that the lockdown approach was a complete failure. But these guys continue pressing on with this approach, not understanding the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Now, after the spring and the summer, we have started to see a surge as related to cases. And then we started to see the politicians going back to escalating their behavior. Unfortunately, what they're seeing right now is that as they continue to try to ratchet up their restrictions, what we're seeing is people are getting, again, closer to that stage of nothing to lose, because they're looking at this detached Congress, which refuses to give them any stimulus, practically has abandoned the American people for 90 days as they have tried to find a way for themselves. And it's practically American people feel abandoned by their government, state and local. And because they feel abandoned by their government, state and local, you have a lot of tense people out there. Unfortunately, many of these state politicians, especially those on the left, they keep ratcheting up the restrictions, not understanding that the American people are not in a very good place. They keep ratcheting up the restrictions, telling people they can't go certain places, and telling business owners that they can't open their businesses. And again, they don't understand the problems of the average everyday man and woman on the street. And they don't understand the anger that is simmering and boiling all across the country. And many of these politicians, they're just sitting there thinking, oh, I'm protecting people. But the critical question has to be asked, who's going to protect you from the people who feel frustrated and angry and are getting more and more tired of all of the what they believe to be excessive restrictions that restrict their freedoms and also restrict their ability to survive? Because again, in a capitalist country where people need jobs in order to live, you need to have businesses open, and you need to have small business open, because if you don't have small business, you have no tax revenue. And if you have no tax revenue coming in, you don't have money for things like hospitals. And I'm repeating that again because this flies over the heads of most of your politicians who think that everything is about trying to preserve ICU capacity. But if you don't have any money, how do you pay for the ICU? That's the critical question many politicians just don't really have an answer for, because they don't understand economics. And because they don't understand economics, they don't understand if you don't have tax revenue coming in to pay for hospitals and you don't have small businesses paying for healthcare, then what happens is your hospitals, even though they are over, as they think, whelmed, they're going to collapse because you have no revenue coming in to be able to pay many of the workers, and workers aren't going to work for free. Now, hospitals are nonprofit, but hospitals get their money, again, from tax revenue paid in through Medicaid and Medicare, and they also get their money mostly from employees paying money into health insurance. And if employees are not working, then how do they get money to pay health insurance? And again, many of your politicians have not connected those dots to understand how these lockdowns are impacting their constituents and eventually are going to lead to the eventual collapse of their state economy. So they have not connected those dots as related to how things work. And they're just thinking, I'm going to go out here and look all like a leader, but they don't understand that you needed a more balanced approach. The approach that you used, it really came, as I think, from what I call a nerd principle, because nerds think about facts and figures, but they never think about the people on the street, and they never really think about how things work, because the whole flatten the curve theory, again, it was nice as related to numbers, but they didn't understand all of those numbers were people, and they didn't understand that if you kill the small businesses, you practically have flatlined the American economy. And if you flatline the American economy and Americans have no way to go out here and pay their bills or feed themselves, eventually you're going to wind up in a place where people are going to get desperate, they're going to get anxious, they're going to get tense. And if you keep pushing people too far, what you're going to get is more and more resistance. And then if you push even further than that, you're going to get them to the point of nothing to lose. And instead of you having a stable republic, you're going to have an explosion of rage all across the country. And you may not possibly be able to contain it, because what happens is, if you don't have your police backing you, you don't have your military backing you, what happens is there's no way to actually get back to order, because all of the people who you needed to get back to order are not on your side. And many of your politicians, they're not really thinking critically about the situation. And because they're not thinking critically about the situation, They're just running on feelings, trying to make it look like they're doing something, but what they're doing is just making the situation even worse, because any smart leader is going to just sit there and say that, yes, we have a lot more COVID cases, but sometimes the best thing to do in a situation is step back for a minute and, take a minute to really think about your actions, because the more restrictions you put on people, the more frustrated they become, the more tension you add to the to populace, and the more tension you add to the populace really starts getting people in a place where they start thinking not about supporting you in stopping COVID, but they start thinking more about their survival. Because when you have people thinking about their survival, thinking about how they're going to get their next dollar, how they're going to be able to get food, or how they're going to have a roof over their head, they start putting those priorities first. And that makes people, when they get to the point of, again, when you start putting restrictions on them, they start, again, heading down that road to nothing to lose. And that's where we see situations like we saw here in New York, where we had the guy at the bar calling it an autonomous zone, and we saw him actually attack a deputy. And that's just another isolated incident, but it's happening more and more. And again, the politicians really are not taking these situations and seeing these are people on the ground, and these people, they would probably cooperate with things if you gave them some leeway. Because if you gave them a little leeway and gave them some space to do their business and supported them in doing their business, then maybe what would happen, it would be people would not be so frazzled and frustrated. And they're not understanding this because they want to be out here and try to be the hero. But what they don't understand about being the hero is you're only the hero if people support you. When I look at this whole situation, on the ground, I see where they're not really listening to people. And again, disconnected, because I look at them on the state level. They just keep pushing people, not understanding. People are getting to the point where it's not like March, where they are accepting of things. What they're doing is starting to talk about pushing back. And the pushback is coming more and more. And what the politicians don't understand is when people start pushing back and you start to see large numbers of people pushing back, that's again a situation you don't want, because when people have nothing to lose, they have nothing invested in your system. And what's happening right now is, with people losing their jobs, people losing businesses they built for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, is people are not, they're losing everything that has them invested in the system. And when they're losing things that have them invested in the system, they're starting to lose things that make them care about participating in the system. And they're also losing respect for authority figures like mayors and governors, and they're losing respect for that authority. And you cannot really govern over people once they have lost respect for you. And again, when you put a person in a place where they have nothing to lose, then you don't know what they're capable of. And I saw that in a video Mr. Superboy talked about a Kansas mayor who created a mask mandate for her city. And what happened to that mayor was she went out here and made this mask mandate, and she found herself flooded with calls making death threats to her and emails making death threats to her. And the mayor really didn't understand. She was forced to resign because of all of the threats she was getting. But I understood why that happened, because, again, when you have people in a situation where they have practically lost everything, what happens is, if you continue to push them, they head towards that nothing to lose situation. And when they hit that nothing to lose situation, again, you just don't know what they're capable of doing because, excuse me, when people hit that situation, they become extremely desperate, and they become extremely desperate because they feel like they have no hope and they feel like they have no support. And when most Americans look at their government, they're not seeing any sort of hope and they're not seeing any sort of support from their government, whether it be on the left or the right, especially on the state level. And they're not seeing any sort of unity as related to their government. All they're seeing is people who just keep pushing at them, people who keep threatening them, and people who they believe are just out here bullying them and trying to intimidate them. And that's what they see politicians as. And what's really troubling for them is that they don't see that you don't have the support to enforce a lot of these policies because more and more people are not on your side. I mean, you do not have your police supporting you because most of your law enforcement was demoralized after the George Floyd riots. I mean, all of the cops out here, a lot of them were demoralized and they have no interest in, really going out here and fighting crime anymore. And many of these cops are not looking to enforce many of these rules. I mean, you have sheriffs in California and New York saying, look, I'm not even bothering with this, and practically defying people. And you're seeing more and more defiance. And the governors and stuff are not really looking at the people on the ground and saying, okay, I'm not getting support for this. I really need to back up and I really need to chill out, because if I'm not getting support, then I'm not going to be seen as a leader that people are going to follow. And if I lose my respect, then people are not going to see me as a leader. So they're not really thinking critically about where they are because they're like disconnected and living in their own bubble where the media keeps telling them, oh, I'm on these press conferences, I'm appearing so regal, I'm appearing so royal, and not understanding that, yes, you are on this, you're getting this media coverage, but nobody's really tuning in to that media coverage. And when people do tune into that media coverage, they really don't care about anything. And the things you're saying and coming out of your mouth are making more people angry. And the angrier you make people, the harder it is to get them to cooperate with you. So you want to go out here and try to make it appear like you're doing something, but what's happening is you're not seeing how this is resonating with people. So you're not seeing how it's resonating and how it's frustrating people. I mean, I see it on the state level here in New York. I also see it on the federal level with the stimulus, which I think is a complete slap in people's face to say, I'm going to give you $600 in a check, when most Americans now are dealing with over $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in debt from back rent, from back electrical bills. I mean, back rent on car payments, back stuff, and credit card bills, because they had to use their credit cards to cover things, because once their unemployment ran out, a lot of these people out here, they found themselves just trying to get by on their savings. And instead of taking care of we the people, we have a bunch of disconnected, cognitively dissonant politicians sitting here bickering and arguing about handing out small change to American people who need, I believe, at least $2,500 a week in order to be able to continue to function. And we need some sort of balanced policy, as I see it, as related to getting small business open and keeping small business open. Because as I see it, if you can open a Walmart, if you can open a Target, if you can open up a bodega, if you can open up a supermarket, then why not open all of these businesses and let them be open and then just have people wearing masks? I mean, why don't you just make a compromise and help people out? Because that's going to help you out, because a lot of these states now are in budget deficits. And because they're in budget deficits right now, what's happening is they don't understand that they're making their own situations worse. Many of these politicians are thinking, oh, if I can't get money from Washington and they're gambling on Washington, I'm going to lay off municipal workers. And eventually you're going to reach a point where you're going to have to lay off super essential municipal workers, like those who work at the water treatment plant, people who work at the fire department, people who work at the police department, people who work in the hospitals. Because again, if you don't have tax revenue coming in, you don't have the money to pay for operating costs in the state. And the federal government can't just keep bailing you out. Small businesses are the backbone of the US economy. And this just does not register in the minds of some of these, as I see it, power-mad politicians who just keep moving the goalpost and keep moving the goalpost, not understanding that the moving the goalpost paradigm is not one you want to be a part of. Because as a guy who has studied beta males for many years, I can tell you that one of the strategies of a beta male is once he gets leverage, what he does is he starts to move the goalpost. And the reason why he moves the goalpost is because, one, he gets attention from people, and two, he's insecure about maintaining that attention from people. So what your beta male will do is, because he's receiving attention, he'll just keep moving the goalpost in order to keep the attention of the person he's involved with, in the hopes of fostering a codependent relationship with that person where he can use his power to control them. And then as he's trying to use his power to control them, he's creating covert contracts where he says, well, if you do this, then I'll give you a little. And then all it does is become an endless cycle. And what happens is you have this endless cycle of people trying to please the beta male until things reach a boiling point and the person eventually explodes in a rage. And usually once that person explodes in a rage is because this guy keeps crap testing people and keeps, escalating the points as related to what he can get. And eventually he pushes too far and that person explodes in a rage and practically beats the living snot out of them. And by that point, he's practically painted himself into a corner because he's moved the goalpost all the way to the back of the wall. And because he's moved the goalpost all the way to the back of the wall, he has no way out for himself. And that's what happens when you follow the move the goalpost paradigm. And I see a lot of politicians playing the move the goalpost game. And with this whole pandemic, where first it was 2 weeks to get things under control, then it becomes 2 months. Then once we had the whole thing with Gretchen Whitmer, we saw a little pullback. And then when George Floyd, we saw a little bit of pullback. And then as things started to stabilize, we started to see a rise in cases again. And then we start to see them playing the move the goalpost game. And some people, they're looking at what's going on as related to the medical field and Pfizer, and they're seeing them move the goalpost once again. And again, people get fed up when they see you play the beta male game of move the goalpost, because when you move the goalpost, it shows that you're, again, insecure, and it also shows that you're dishonest, and people don't like people who go out here and lie to them. And this is something the beta male does, is he goes out here and he plays this game, not knowing how dangerous it is, not for himself, because people get fed up once they see you constantly moving the goalpost. When you have a goal with people, and this is something I talk about in my book, The Band Crisis, is a goal is a straight line. And usually when you have a goal, you sit there and you say, okay, like when I go out here and I ask an artist what his rates are for a cover, I find out what his rates are, and then after that, I give him a proposal, we set a deadline, and then that's it. There's no extra stuff. With the beta male, he's always looking to add extra stuff. He's always looking to pull strings, and that's where you get people who start to become frustrated because you agreed to one set of terms, but he keeps changing the terms. And he's changing the terms because he's insecure about the attention he's receiving. So that's something that frustrates a lot of people out here. And when they look at these politicians who keep moving the goalposts and keep putting on the restrictions, that's and people's whole livelihoods and lives are on the line. That's where you have people practically getting to a point where they are just, the anger is escalating, the tension is rising, and that's where you start to head down that road towards nothing to lose. And you don't want to head down that road, because when you head down that road, it's ugly. And history has shown us how ugly that is. I mean, if you look at France in 1789, that was the French Revolution. And that was a textbook example of what happens when you go out here and you push people too far. Now, back then, the king was out here blowing money on all sorts of things, luxury goods. People were suffering, and the queen told them to eat cake. And then you had him go out here and buy the super expensive painting while people were suffering. And that was the thing that set people off. And that was the thing that led from people from being simmering and boiling in anger to eventually exploding in a rage that led to a revolution in the country. So that's something that many politicians today, they're not thinking about looking back at history as related to the French Revolution. And they're not understanding that in the French Revolution, what happened was you had politicians like they are right now. They were fed up. People were fed up with these rulers who were really disconnected and detached from people. And they went out here and they revolted because they felt like these people were not serving them, and they were just out here serving themselves. And when you have people here in America seeing many of these politicians like Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done while their hair salons are closed, Gavin Newsom going to a restaurant while their restaurants are closed, and seeing people going out here having their lives and then telling them they can't have theirs, that's creating, again, not a powder keg, but a nuclear holocaust that could practically consume the whole country in rage, because they see that hypocrisy, and that really makes them angry because they're told they can't have their job, they can't have their money, they can't even have their home, but this person's just going to sit there and disrespect them to their face by creating rules and then not following the rules. And then you have other double standards, like the whole restaurants being closed in California. And then you have these Hollywood sets with these catering services, and the catering services are sitting there and they have the exact same setup as the restaurant, but the restaurant is restricted and the catering service, they can go on, and the craft services of Hollywood can go on. And that really shows how it's like people feel like the elites are having their lives, but they're telling them they can't have their lives. And that makes people, again, to the point where they start to get really angry. And again, when you have 200 to 300 million people who are out here so angry and frustrated, that's not a powder keg. That's a nuclear explosion ready to happen. And many of your politicians, they're sitting there thinking, oh, I'll give them $600 and that may pacify them. But no, it's not going to pacify you when you're staring down $5,000 to $10,000 of debt you didn't want to create, and you didn't want to create it because you were just trying to survive. And the reason why you're surviving is because your government told you that if you did this to flatten their curve, you would be able to get on with your life. But instead of you being able to get on with your life months later, what's happening is you just keep getting strung along, and the restrictions just keep getting tighter and tighter. And because they get tighter and tighter, what happens is people start to feel like they can't breathe. And when people feel like they can't breathe, then what happens is that, again, those people are going to start going into fighting for their lives. And this is something your politicians, state and local and federal, aren't really understanding. They're just sitting there thinking they've got time. But as I see it, many of these guys really don't understand how they don't have the time they think they do. Because again, one of the other things I learned about beta males is that they always think that they have all this time, but they don't understand the clock is ticking and you're getting closer to your own end because you're not really looking at the big picture. You're so caught up in the attention you're receiving. You can't understand that it's negative attention, and you can't really understand that the attention you're receiving is not really conducive to being able to maintain any sort of order. So they're not really thinking critically about things, because a lot of these guys who were coming in, they were coming in from an emotional perspective. Some of them were coming in from their Trump obsession, because some of them had a major Trump obsession. They were taking Donald Trump very personally. And because they were taking Donald Trump very personally, what happened was they were thinking about finding ways to one-up Donald Trump instead of trying to serve the American people. So many of, especially the left-leaning ones, were thinking, I want to get Donald Trump. I want to show that I'm better than Donald Trump, not understanding that this is about the American people, and it's not about your feelings about Donald Trump. It's like I talked about in one of my classic videos, America's Trump obsession. A lot of people have an obsession with Donald Trump, and even though he's gone, he's still in their minds. And because they were so obsessed with Donald Trump, they created a Pyrrhic victory for America, where they went out here and they managed to flatten the curve, and that curve, flattening the curve, was a Pyrrhic victory. And because you poured more resources into something to win, but ultimately you wound up losing more than anything at all. And that's why I called it America's Pyrrhic victory, because yes, you managed to flatten the curve in the short term, but in the long term, what you have done is alienated the American people. You have angered the American people, and you have the American people on edge. And because you have the American people on edge, what is happening is many of these people out here are feeling like they have nothing to lose, because a lot of people over the last year, again, most Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, and most small businesses were living day to day and managing to eke out razor-thin profit margins as related to the service-based economy. And this flies over the heads of many of your local politicians and your federal politicians, who don't really understand how dire it is on the street for the average, everyday American man and woman. And because they don't understand how dire it is for the average, everyday man and woman, what is happening is that they don't see how they're teetering towards the whole nothing to lose scenario. And when I was, again, in March, when I first heard about the lockdowns, I came up with a worst case scenario where I said all it would take is one black man being killed by a white police officer to set things off. And sadly, with the murder of George Floyd, we actually saw that happen. And in this case, if I see these politicians keep pushing, I see a very, very, very bad situation, because more and more people, again, are heading towards that whole nothing to lose place, that place of darkness, because when you have somebody saying, oh, you're going to lose, not only lose your job, but you're out of credit cards, you're out of options, and you're headed towards what I call the eviction. It's just a flood of evictions. You're going to have a lot of people overwhelming the homeless shelters and on the streets. And all of those people, when they have nothing to lose, oh my goodness. I mean, they have no place to go. And when they have no place to go, they're coming, and it's not going to be pretty as I see it. I mean, it is not going to be pretty if you have 2-3 million people evicted. I mean, that's not something anybody wants. And then on top of it, you have again, the Trump supporters out here. And again, many of these politicians do not understand the atomic powder keg that they are creating. They don't understand the atomic powder keg that is out there, and they don't understand what they are creating by their continuing what people to think is indifference, and even as related to Mitch McConnell, his malice of forethought in playing these political games. They don't understand the atomic bomb that they are creating all across this country, because when you have people who are at that stage, and again, I have been at that stage in my life, I have been in that dark period, and if it wasn't for the Most High living God being with me, I don't know where I'd be right now. I mean, it is a horrifying place to be. I mean, if you thought George Floyd was something, those riots all across the country, what's going to happen would be make George Floyd look like a beach party, because that explosion of rage all across the country, I mean, it would be one of the worst things you would ever see. And sadly, many of the politicians, they don't understand the gravity of the situation, because again, when I saw those guys storming that state house with Gretchen Whitmer, that was just the tip. I mean, as related to things. And when I heard that threat made against that mayor, that was again these are warning signs, and nobody's paying attention to the warning signs out here to how bad things are. Instead, they're just sitting there. You have people in my state, New York, pushing restrictions and wanting to push restrictions after Christmas and wanting to shut down businesses, not understanding you're heading into a bad place. And then they're talking about laying off people, like in the transit and things like that. You're headed towards a really bad place, because if people feel like they're not supported by their government, then they do what Thomas Jefferson said and want to take off that government and put on a new government. And that's where we're headed, because your politicians really aren't listening to we the people. They're not really concerned about the needs of we the people. They're trying to implement other systems and trying to intimidate people. But again, when you have people with nothing to lose, they stop becoming compliant and they start become defiant. So it's a real situation. And again, a lot of people, they don't understand the whole nothing to lose situation, because they've never really been there. I mean, when you're in a place where you have no job, no money, and no support, it's a very horrifying place to be. And it's not a place where a lot of people have been. And again, a lot of these politicians, they're legacy politicians. So they're used to having family members hook them up with jobs. So they don't understand what it is to finally get a break at a job, finally get an opportunity to start making some money, or finally get a small business going. And they don't understand that when you have, that's something important to you, because this is how you feed yourself. This is how you clothe yourself. This is how you take care of yourself. This is how you take care of your family. And you're just sitting there, you're a guy who just makes a bunch of speeches, and you don't understand what this means to this person, because you never were that person. You lived in a sheltered environment. You lived a sheltered life. People always gave you what you wanted. So you don't understand what the man on the street is going through. And because many of these politicians have lived that sheltered life, like those in France in the 1780s, they don't really understand the struggles of the average everyday American out here. So they're sitting there thinking, oh, we've got time. But no, you don't have time. I mean, you blew all your time by trying to play these games 3 months ago, and you're running out of time, because when you have people in a nothing to lose place, that means that they're ready to go out here, and it's not going to be pretty, because again, you don't know what these people are capable of doing. I mean, again, what George Floyd, that's a beach party compared to what you're going to get later on. I mean, thank you, wrestling superstar. He says, "Good evening, Mr. James. I cannot stay long. As always, you are making excellent points as related to the current state of the U.S. Continue to get that great work, and let's get those likes up. Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. I really made this live stream because I understand the gravity of things as related to this country, and I really wanted people to understand what's going on out here because people, yes, people are sick in the hospitals, but you got to have money in order to pay for the hospitals. You have to have tax revenue coming in to pay for the hospitals. The government just can't keep printing money. And we need support for our essential hospital workers. And we need to get the military doctors to help support those workers. Because if you have so many, because there are doctors and nurses who are quitting their jobs because they're so overwhelmed. And as Mr. Superboy talked about, so many are out here and they feel like they've been through a war and they really need support. And we have a military out here, military doctors. I mean, Donald Trump could bring the UNSS Comfort to New York, and they did nothing with it during the early days of the pandemic. And that was an embarrassment. And that was an embarrassment because we had the USNS Comfort, we had the Javits Center, we had the Brooklyn Center, and we didn't have any sort of effort to try to get this going. I mean, if these cases are going up, then we need to go get this type of staffing to be able to treat the sick as part of the triage. And we also need to be able to keep the economy moving as we're triaging the American people. So there needs to be a different approach because clearly the flatten the curve approach has completely failed. But one of the things I know about American people is a lot of them don't really understand how to accept a failure. And when it comes down to many nerds out here, like they really don't understand failure, and they don't understand that if something doesn't work, then you have to stop, reevaluate, and try something else, because to go back to restrictions is like the definition of insanity. That approach has already proven to be a complete failure. And the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And to go back to let's lock everything down, that has already been proven to be a failure, and it's time to do something different. And if I were running things in a governmental level, I would say it's time for a triage approach. And we need, because if this is the winter is going to be so bad, then it's time for a new approach, because the whole sheltering people is not going to work, because if the virus spreads with people being indoors, then putting people indoors is actually putting them more at risk. So we, again, need a new approach, and a new approach where we can start to triage people, because when you triage people, then what happens is we're going to take care of the sick, but we're also going to take care of the economy, and we're also going to do things where we don't lock everything down, where we try to open things up, and then we also try to build the trust of the American people. So that's one of the things I would do as an approach, because what they're doing right now, the politicians, they're doing with these restrictions is, again, it's alienating people, and you want to get people on your side. I mean, I understand this virus is deadly, but you need to get people on your side, and you need to get people support, because if you push people to the nothing to lose stage, you're going to lose their respect. And when you lose their respect, you're not going to even be able to get near anywhere their support, because they're in that desperate place. And when you're in that desperate place, you're in a place where, again, you're not thinking about anything but your survival. And when a person is thinking only about their survival, that's when the human beings become extremely dangerous. And that's not a place, again, your politicians really want people to be. They're not really thinking about how dangerous things are, and they're not thinking about how you don't want a whole nation like that as related to things. I'm sorry, Jay, that your boss gave you a written warning for reading the book Stop Simping in the Workplace. But the best place to do that, you have to read that at home, because that's the kind of book that some people, they can't handle. And a lot of bosses, they don't like to hear the truth, because Stop Simping in the Workplace, it has helped a lot of guys get their careers into gear. And that book is going to teach you a lot about workplace predators. I'm sorry that he gave you a written warning, but it just shows that he's just completely clueless about how the workplace works, because he doesn't understand that workplace predators, they take advantage of things, and he's going to be in a vulnerable place where he's going to need that book sooner rather than later, especially in this era of Me Too. Jay asks, what are my thoughts on the homeless epidemic? That's going to get worse, because what's happening now is, again, once the moratorium of evictions ends, you're going to have a flood of evictions. And when you have a flood of evictions, again, you have more and more people on the street, and more people exposed to COVID. And even worse, you have more and more people in the stage of nothing to lose. And when you have people on the stage of nothing to lose, that's not something you want, especially when you have a city with demoralized police officers who aren't interested in actually enforcing the law anymore, because the mayor has alienated them, the governor has alienated them. This is not a good place for people, because, again, you don't have the law enforcement there like you had back in March. You don't have, because the police here in New York, they were very rickety as it is, as related to their relationship with the mayor. And that has actually gotten worse. And there was a scathing report as related to that. They got a scathing report as related to the way they handled George Floyd. So they're not really interested in going out here and being as active as they were during the era of Rudy Giuliani, where they had all that support. So again, pushing restrictions when you have no law enforcement support to enforce it, that's not a very smart thing to do. And pushing people to nothing to lose with no police, I mean, yeah, you can call in the National Guard, but you don't have enough guardsmen to handle, I say, 2, 3, 4 million people in New York City alone, or people upstate, or even across the country. You don't have enough military to handle 200 million people with nothing to lose. I mean, that's something that most people aren't thinking about. They're thinking, oh, I've got this. It's like, a lot of these people have been demoralized. A lot of people, even in the military right now, are suffering. They're struggling to make ends meet. And it's not a place, again, most politicians understand, because they don't understand it, because they've never had to live on that edge. They've never had to live at that position of nothing to lose. And they never had to be in that place where you just feel completely alone. You feel completely abandoned. You feel completely betrayed. People who you thought were going to help you just walked out on you. And that's one of the things I felt, again, back in 2000, when I was told they had no place for me at Strive. I came in there, did good work for them, but they told me they had no place for me. And I know how a lot of American people feel, because I was there myself. You feel like you're alone. You feel like you're abandoned. And that's why so many people are just, again, on edge. And some people are so on edge that they're even committing suicide. And that's something else that your people aren't talking about in the mainstream media. They're not talking about all the people who have committed suicide during these lockdowns because their mental health practically deteriorated. They're not even talking about people with cancer and diabetes, or people with kidney disease. They couldn't even get the medical care that they needed. And they're not talking about any of that, because everything has become just tunnel vision for many of these politicians. And many of these people, they don't understand that you got to get out of tunnel vision and start seeing things from a panoramic perspective, because the tunnel vision only has you thinking, I have to lower these numbers, but you can't sit there and think lowering the numbers, because there are people connected to those numbers. And you have to think about all the people, and you have to try, and that whenever you think triage, you think about all the people. You have to think about keeping those people who are healthy, but then you have to think about maintaining their health. And one of the ways you maintain their health is making sure that their economic situation remains stable. Because when you make somebody's economic situation stable, you're keeping a person, out of the hospitals, and you're keeping a person from practically heading towards a place where they head towards that place of nothing to lose. And when you have people at that place with nothing to lose, the death rate right there can really start to get high, because when you have people who start to get addicted to drugs, people committing suicide, I mean, nobody's talking about how these people out here are suffering. All we get is one story, and we really need to start thinking about other aspects of all the other people who are suffering out here, because people in these lockdowns, a lot of them were placed in isolation, and that isolation led to a lot of people's mental health declining. So a lot of people aren't really again, politicians aren't really thinking about the big picture, because nobody's presenting the big picture. Some of them didn't even think about the big picture because they're not thinking objectively or thinking critically about the situation. And they really aren't, all they're thinking about is, I need to do something. But sometimes the best thing is to do nothing, step back, and then come up with a more comprehensive plan. Because when I know about having anxiety is, once you start to get into panic mode, what happens is you start going around in circles. You keep trying to do the exact same thing, not understanding doing the exact same thing will never yield a different result. If something is not working, sometimes you have to stop, and sometimes you have to stop because this is not working. This approach is not working. And to go back to an approach that did not work in March, in December, shows that you have not really learned anything. And it's time to do something else. And it's time to go out here and try something else, because you're getting closer and closer to the brink, and you're getting closer and pushing people closer and closer to the position of nothing to lose. And you don't want people to get to the position of nothing to lose, because like Dr. Gaines has posted, when people have everything and have nothing left to lose, when people lose everything and have nothing left to lose, they lose it. And when they lose it, that's something that most people, they're not really paying attention to, because when a person has nothing to lose, again, you don't know what they're capable of. And when people they get into that place, it's one of the ugliest places a human being could ever be. And I look at this country and I look at how divided it is, and how people again are so on edge. And it reminds me of what I read in the history books about the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, the American Revolution. And again, when the government does not serve the people they get to a place where it's not a pretty place, because they feel like they're not being served by their government. And you have the government trying just having no respect for them, because again, to tell people you're going to give them $600 and then you want to argue about it, that really shows how disconnected people are, because you took their businesses, you took their jobs, you took their ability to have a home. And this is something that has people tense, on edge, and you took everything from them. And then you want to tell them that you don't want to give them anything. And when they pay taxes into this country, that just comes from the greatest place of hubris, as I see it. And many American politicians don't understand how arrogant they're coming off, how disrespectful they're coming off, and how their attitude towards the people who voted for them is just condescending and obnoxious. And they don't see that if they keep pushing they, as I see it, are going to push people too far. And if you push people too far, heaven help this country. I'm going to wrap up tonight's stream, and I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. Jay, yeah, some of these guys I think are simps and beta males because they keep trying to escalate things because they're getting attention, because you have a lot of beta males. Whenever they get attention, they keep escalating things so they can continue to get more attention. It's just like a female in a lot of cases. And they don't really understand, oh, Kitty Candy, I haven't seen you in a long time. It's glad to see you here. They don't understand that attention, it doesn't mean that you're doing things well. Yeah, you're getting attention from the people in your social circles. And this is one of the things the simp never understands and the beta male doesn't understand, is that, yeah, you're getting attention from the people in your social circles, but people out here, they're not hearing you. And the thing is, if they're not hearing you, you're in a place where you're not seeing the danger that's around you. So I see a lot of these guys, they're following the simp and beta male things I talk about in Stop Simping, Why Men Don't Need Finance to Get Romance, and Stop Simping in the Workplace. They're following a lot of those approaches, and what's happening is they don't see how that's taking them into a bad place. Thank you, Z-Ken. I'm going to keep trying to keep doing out here. Yeah, I've been out of work for a long time. I haven't worked since 2008, since the 2008 recession. So I know how bad things are. I mean, I've been in a bad place for quite a few times in my life. So I know where the nothing to lose place is. And I know where these politicians are taking the country because I've been there. I'm still on those edges, and I know where that edge is. And, thank you, T-Mac. I'm glad you enjoy it. I know people on that edge. I know all about that edge. And one person on the edge is kind of scary, but, 200 million, 300 million people on that edge, and you're in a danger zone because one person might be able to help. You might be able to reason with them, and you might even be able to help them out. But 300 million people, if you have that, that's really a big problem. And I see a lot of these guys, they're nerds. Like, I think Fauci's a nerd. I think Mnuchin is a nerd. Again, they know facts and figures, but they don't know people. And they don't really want to sit down and connect with people and really hear them and really hear their struggles or hear what they're going through. For them, it's all about numbers. And if you're into politics, it can't be about numbers. It has to be about people. Even in business, it's about people, and it's about your relationship with the people. Thank you, Born Savior, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. It's all about the people and your relationship with them. And if you can't connect with people and, see them as you would see yourself, like Jesus says about seeing do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. I mean, if you can't have that love for another person to see what they're going through and understand what they're going through, then you're not effective as a leader, because a leader has to really, he has to put his people first, and he has to go out here and do what needs to be done. And I look at this country, and again, I don't see people connecting with each other. I don't see them understanding where people are coming from. Again, when you have a country of 200 million people and you leave them hanging for 3 going on 4 months, you have Pelosi bickering and arguing with McConnell, and they're not looking outside and saying, hey man, a lot of these small businesses are the backbone of the country. You have 20, 25, 30 million people out of work. In some cases, I say even more than that. And you're not really, thank you, GM, for the super chat. You have all these people out of work. I mean, you have a powder keg going on, and you're telling people, oh, there's nothing going to be done about eviction moratoriums. And on the subject of eviction moratoriums, they're not even thinking about the landlords up here, because a lot of landlords, they're still having to pay property tax. They still have to pay maintenance on their property. They still are dealing with a lot of losses, because here in New York, we've had landlords practically have people move out of their buildings. I mean, nobody's really thinking about, you know, everybody out here, and they're just thinking about tunnel vision. Oh, we need to flatten the curve, but there has to be another approach, because this one clearly isn't working. And to go back to what didn't work before and then say it'll work again is complete insanity. Again, I need a new approach, and again, something that is, as I see it, more triage, and something that keeps businesses open and keeps the economy going, because you can't pay doctors without tax dollars. You can't pay doctors without people paying in the health insurance. And eventually, this approach is going to, again, completely collapse the economy, flatline the economy, and make it where you're going to, again, push people further to the nothing to lose situation, something your average politician really isn't thinking about, because, again, they think that they have so much time, but you don't have the time you think. And with people, again, on edge, you have people just, again, pushing back more and more. I mean, I saw in California, the judge pushed back as related to that restriction on restaurants. I saw the Supreme Court push back as related to the churches. And if they keep pushing, again, it's not going to be pushback through the courts. It's just people getting more and more fed up. And I see civil disobedience in the future. And again, with no police to even support that, because even the police are not with it. And even the military, in some cases, I don't think is with it. So I don't see this. I see, again, when you have a nation of people with nothing to lose, you have you have a bad place, and a bad place. And again, nobody's really thinking about it, because, again, when you have guys who just are disconnected, they don't really see how dire things are for people out here like myself and many other people out here who've been having it hard for a long time. Now, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I decided, just keep talking because it was a question I wanted to answer. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream. And I'd really appreciate it if you would donate to the Cash app, because, again, that allows me to continue paying for the internet. It allows me to be able to go out here and be able to take care of business. And I also would appreciate if you guys would come out and pick up some of my books on Amazon.com. They make great gifts for your family and your friends. They're all family friendly. Books like ISIS, The Main Event, which is available on Amazon right now. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read ISIS, The Main Event for free. You can read ISIS, The Main Event for free if you have Kindle Unlimited, but it's available in paperback and Kindle format. And if you picked up, John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, which is also available in paperback and Kindle format, I'll leave a link to that one in the chat as well. It is a hard profession. Writing is very hard to do because it doesn't make a lot of money and it's a lot of time. So it's a lot of work, but I enjoy doing it. And again, you can pick up John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose on Amazon in paperback and Kindle format. And I also have the new vampire novel, which came out this Halloween, Eternal Night, which is also available. This one just got its first 5-star ranking online. So people love Eternal Night, and it's definitely one you definitely want to pick up and try. It's the first horror novel I've ever written, Eternal Night. So this is a book you really want to check out. It's also available in paperback and Kindle format. And this one is also available on Kindle Unlimited, and you can read it for free. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read Eternal Night for free. So this book is also available as well. And this is one you definitely want to pick up. People have been telling me they have loved this book. I had one of my Facebook friends telling me that she was shouting at the book. So this is one people are really enjoying. And I have one final book, B-Scheme, Blast from the Past, which is also available on Amazon as well. And this one just got its first 5-star ranking on Amazon. The books are now, SJS Direct books are getting a lot of 5-star rankings very quickly. And this is a follow-up to E-Steam, The Sands of Time. So you definitely want to pick this one up. This one it is a fun fantasy story, but it also features a fun surprise in the back. The first E-Steam comic done by Bill Walko. So if you want to check out what a future SJS Direct comic would look like, this book is an example of my writing as related to comics. So this is one you definitely want to check out, E-Steam Blast from the Past, where you can get that sneak peek of the E-Steam No Good Deed comic. This is a full 9-page story. So I've got a lot of great books on Amazon that I definitely want you guys to check out and pick up. And we got 50 in the chat. And if you guys go out and pick these books up right now, and you have Amazon Prime, you probably get these books really quickly for the holidays. And if you have Kindle for Christmas, day after Christmas, I'm going to be having some books up there coming up for free on Kindle. So you can get a lot of great SJS Direct books. They're right now in paperback and Kindle format. And I have a whole host of great books on there that are great reading for your kids, great reading for your family. I have had readers tell me that their kids enjoy these stories. And I really am trying to get more people picking up SJS Direct books. And there's lots of great titles on Amazon right now. So I want to thank everybody again for coming out to the stream. And I hope you pick up some of the SJS Direct books. And I hope you come back for next week's stream.